Well, good morning, Pat McArt in
Morning, Jude.
Donegal.
How are you?
And where exactly, Bert, is it?
Burt, yes, it's the most famous thing in Burt is the Catholic Church. It was named Building of the Century, or Building even possibly of the Millennium. It was designed by Liam McCormick. Beautiful church. It's designed almost on, looks like Errigal, Mount Errigal.
Well, what is particularly striking about it?
It's, at night, Jude, when there's lights on, you'd swear it was a spaceship.
Oh, wow. Is it circular then?
Circular, yeah. It's a very unusual church in the circle, exactly. Yeah.
I think I've seen that actually. Has it been there for the last 40, 50 years?
About 40 years, yeah. It's outstanding, Jude. I'm not kidding now. It's absolutely beautiful. If you like, you can see during the summer all these registrations. You know, the motorhomes with the Dutch and the German and the Belgian. And the Italian stopped outside, people getting photographs. This is a fabulous church, no doubt.
Is it reflecting or echoing some circle or?
Yeah, well, you see the Green Navalia is above it, and that's thousands of years old. And there's also a circular, so the design is based on that. And there's somebody told me one of the mountains in Donegal is supposed to be an influence on it as well. But I'd say Green Navalia is actually the more reasonable. Connection.
Parallel. Yeah. Okay, let's down to business. What it says in the papers, and we'll start with the Irish Times, where Stephen Collins, that well-known columnist, is congratulating the coalition. He was sort of damning them a couple of days ago. He was telling them that Sinn Féin was going to take over, and today he's saying good for them. They've taken back control from unelected officials. And he's referring there to NEFIT, is that how you pronounce it? The medical NEFIT, people. So he says that's good for democracy and it's about time, etc. Yeah. What do you think, Pat? Is that?
See, with Stephen, Collins, you always have to. Stephen, I would say, is pretty right wing, and though this, Jude, I have to sort of half agree with him on this occasion, and much as it pains me to do so, because last week, if we go into level 5, lockdown hits in right away. Now, Jude, the Republic of Ireland's only coming out of the recession brought about by 2008, and the cost that was phenomenal. Now, I heard Dan O'Brien, who's a well-known economist, on the other morning, and said, if we go into lockdown and there's suddenly 200,000 people plus on the dole, and them getting COVID payments and whatever else, suddenly he says, we are into the situation, we're back to the begging bowl, going around the world, big finance companies and houses begging for cash. So the politicians do have to balance at this time. There's the public health concern, but there's also concerns for jobs and people's livelihoods. Now, I don't like the Stephen Collins sort of attitude. It's almost like the Trump, that I'll make the decisions, not the professionals. But having said that, there is an onus on the politicians to make decisions this time. Now, I heard Micheál Martin on, Leo Varadkar. Somebody says now they don't know whether he's Taoiseach or Taoiseach at the minute, but he was on yesterday, and he said on the Friday or the Thursday they were talking. We don't need even go to level 3 is pretty good, and then he said suddenly on a Sunday they said we skip. Not only do we not stay on level 3, we skip level 4 and go to level 5. Now, Jude, the implications are very, very serious. Level 5 is lockdown. Level 5 is economy shutdown. Level 5 is people staying within 5 kilometres of their own house. That's pretty serious.
Well, I can see how drastic it is, but at the same time, the figures of infected people, and I gather 2 people going into hospital in the south and even more so in the north, are really kind of scary. So, absolutely. I come back to this point with the medical people and the politicians in the south particularly. They forever are telling us that we follow the best science and medical advice. Yeah. Now, in this case, they have rejected, for better or worse, they have rejected the best scientific and medical advice. Now, in that case, never open your mouth on that subject again. Admit that you're making political decisions, but you're prepared to set aside the best scientific and medical advice. That has always been the mantra, and now they've tossed it away as if they never said it in the first place. I just think that's a wee bit brazen-faced. Now, that's aside from the whole question of should you have extreme lockdown. Well, I tell you, Pat, I appreciate all the terrible difficulties of people losing their jobs and losing their businesses and everything else. But it's better than being dead.
Yeah.
This is a battle between life and death, really. And
yeah.
There's ways round a lack of cash for a country. There are ways round it. We're part of the EU. There's America. There's a whole lot of stuff. And would you not rather be working on half your salary? Would you not rather be on the dole than in the graveyard?
Yeah, but that's the very, very start position. But right, the number. I never thought I'd hear myself saying this, but they seem to have got a bit of a handle on how to deal with COVID now. The death rate is not at the start. It was Bergamo. They were taking in the army to bury the dead. Now, the number of people dying, they seem to have got some sort of a handle on how to deal with patients. I don't know what, maybe it's the new drugs, maybe there's some sort of treatment I don't know about. But if we go into another lockdown and we're economic, the whole situation, our kids are going to pay a terrible price for that for years and years to come. People who now have good livelihoods are going to. There has to be a balancing act. I don't think we can do this twice. I really, there has to be a balance between health and the economy, not one to the exclusion of the other. Public health should always come first, and I think it is coming first. Like we're still, Jude, we can't go outside. Hold on, Jude, we can't go outside our county. We can't do anything here. There's all sorts of laws and all the rest at the minute, and they're going in. They're talking about increasing fines for people who don't wear masks. No, it's not as if it's a free for all.
Well, it's a difficult one, but I still would say that in the end, you're better to have work for the health of the population, save people from dying, than you are guarding the economy. Now, that's a terrible thing. You have to try it as best you can to find a balance, but still, it's not an even balance. Being alive, your health comes first. We all know that. Health's your wealth. Just one other little item on this from the papers today before we go on to the next one. I noticed where Dermot Ferriter, he does a column on this lockdown and the change in terms of the government making the decisions as distinct from the science and medical people. Yeah. He says that there's a professor, Jerry Killeen, in UCC, who's a professor in applied pathogen ecology. Yeah. And some short while ago, he expressed a different medical view on the virus, not in kilter or not in harmony with the accepted Tony Holohan and so on. Yeah. And he lost his position. I don't know if he lost his position as a prof, but he lost his position, whatever board it was, for disagreeing with him. And Ferriter's point is there's quite a bit of disagreement among scientists and medical people, and that anybody who speaks out of turn in terms of the NEFIT group, the Tony Holohan people, that they really are just squashed. And he sees this as a sort of attack on free speech. What do you think? Should they be expressing their own doubts, or is that not putting the rest of us non-medical people into a state of panic?
Well, see, that's it. There's conspiracy theories out there now are rampant. And there are people saying, Jude, right. And this is where I sort of I lose the sort of the northern vote. A lot of people in the Republic, when this whole COVID thing came out, obeyed the rules big time. It was almost total shutdown. North, because of Boris Johnson, totally different. There were people coming across the border summer's day, heading to beaches in Donegal, and no sign of masks, no sign of social distancing, nothing. And now we have one of the biggest, Derry, Donegal, Tyrone, North Strabane, have one of the biggest, we have the biggest. It's the biggest in the British Isles and the island of Ireland and that part is called UK, we call it UK. So we have paid a price because, and I always put that down to the Dominic Cummings factor. There was a sort of attitude in Britain. They were flocking to the beaches in Brighton and Blackpool, and Dominic Cummings sort of said, he drove up and sort of said, and I think a lot of people in Britain says, well, sure, if he's doing it. Whereas in the Republic of Ireland, there was almost this sort of total conformity of people abiding by the rules. And then it all started to slip.
Well, how would you be in favour? I personally would be in favour of enforcing lockdown. If you have a regulation,
yes, yeah, if you have a regulation,
there are
enforce it. Yeah.
But a lot of people have been giving out stink in the south. They say that these various roadblocks were put up on the motorway and so on, that there was terrible backups of traffic, and people couldn't get
4 and 5 hours. Yeah.
goodness what. But would you say that's a price worth paying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that too. There's no point in regulations if you don't see that they actually are kept.
Jude, as well as that, the number of people, and even I saw, I was in Letterkenny area, I saw a guy going into a shop. Apparently, somebody said to a guy there quite recently, put on your mask. He says, I'll wear one at Halloween. Now, that sort of an attitude is unbelievable.
I think, the whole thing's very confused and difficult. But my conclusion would be, put the health first. And if you're going to send out a message to people about lockdown, make sure it's enforced. And as somebody said, pick out some people who have flouted it and really publicly penalise them. Good, hefty fine. And you'd be surprised how many people have come to their senses as a result of that. That's my view.
I would agree. Jude, look here, to conclude as well. If you go to a shop and you don't have a mask on, you shouldn't serve you.
Right, exactly. That'll be a good start, all right. Okay, move on to the next item, which is I find very interesting. And funny enough, Dermot Ferreter features in this too. I should maybe start by saying that Dermot Ferreter featured in my last book with yourself. And the previous book, he was the guest of honor. And he's a guy that I like a lot, actually. I think he's a bloody good historian. He does something that's very hard to do. He takes a profession, which is a historian in this case, and he makes it interesting to ordinary people. He can talk about it in a lively...
He always puts it in a context that's easily understood. In a human context,
So I have a lot of time for him. However, yesterday, on Claire Byrne live show on RTE radio, they were discussing Terence McSWINEY, the Lord Mayor of Cork, who died in October 1920, just 100 years ago. And they discussed it, and he talked about it, and he talked about McSWINEY's family, and he talked about the reaction of the people of Cork and the people of Ireland and so on. Now, I was in the car at the time, and I was listening to it, and I sat in the car for a wee while, and then I said, I'll switch off and I'll rush into the house and I'll get the rest of it. So that's what I did. I switched off the car, jumped into the house, got the radio on, and got the rest of it. But I missed a bit, okay? The one thing I didn't hear at any point was any parallel between Terence McSWINEY's hunger strike and, say, Bobby Sands' hunger strike, or any of the other hunger strikers. Now, there was no mention. Well, when I was there, I didn't hear any mention. Now, some people on Twitter have corrected me and said that they did make a reference to it. But in my opinion, I cannot see how you would talk about a Sinn Féin Lord Mayor dying on hunger strike 100 years ago in an attempt to get Ireland's independence from Britain, and not even refer to, or at least not make the centerpiece of your discussion, the case that occurred in the North, 30 years ago. I just think that's outrageous.
Jude, someone, I'm going to go back to the Glenanne thing, because that brought it home to me how, there was 120 plus people murdered, and the narrative in the Republic all the time is, in fact, Owen Harris and Charity Flanagan attacked the programme, not the substance of the story, which was 120 people murdered. And all the time there's this thing in the South, if it's the North, don't go down. Terence McSWINEY was one of our heroes and all the rest. Bobby Sands, he's up there, right? The bottom line, as far as I can see in all this, is it reminds me of the story of a woman I know whose father was in the old IRA, and she told me, oh no, they're not the same people. This modern IRA. And I'm going, are you for real? If you look at some of the 1920s and the campaign, it was they were illegal executions carried out in the state. There was boys shot up the back lanes in the back of the head. There was all sorts of raids, and there was a guy tied on a beach in Spanish Strand in a carry, and they watched the tide come in and drown him. And don't tell me that these things didn't happen. And all this, now, but Jude, here, I'm going to go off on a tangent again. We have had a long, it's Gay Byrne. I used to wonder why Gay Byrne detested Republicans, and then I discovered his father had fought for the British Army in, I think, 1918. We
Well,
had,
so did the father of a lot of Republicans.
yeah, exactly. But he had a certain slant. He thought when his father came back, that the Republicans had 1916 had destroyed his father, and that he had been marked as a traitor for fighting for Britain, all this sort of stuff. And you go through what do you call it? Kevin Mayer's Irish Times, Owen Harris, Ruth Dudley Edwards. You can keep on going. That is a narrative that has been peddled down south for so many years, and that you're wondering why no mention of Bobby Sands. There's your answer. Oh no, that what happened in the north is not the same. In other words, people in the north living under oppression and what they regard as subjugation are not entitled to fight for the rights. They're terrorists and they're thugs.
Well, I think yes, I totally agree with that. I think it really annoys me is that they refuse to deal with the troubles of the 1920s in a realistic fashion. It's sort of always bathed in a kind of a golden light with, sweet and sad music. And they celebrated, as I think entitled to, the 1916 Rising. And for example, as you know, we're doing a series of interviews with people. And one of the people I interviewed is Mary O'Rourke. Mary O'Rourke is a Fianna Fáil woman, but in passing, she just mentioned that I think it was her father was very friendly with Michael Collins and had a great regard for him. And she said, as so would I, and so would anybody. Michael Collins, I mean, among the famous things about killing the 12 apostles, the 12 British spies or whatever, Michael Collins, whenever the Cork Examiner or other newspapers put out pieces critical of Sinn Féin and critical of republicanism, his men took hammers, went in there and broke up the printing presses. Several of the journalists working for the Cork Examiner and other papers were shot dead. So this notion that the troubles of 1920s were bathed in a beautiful golden light and reverent music, whereas the troubles in the north were nothing but spooky music and darkness and red violent flashes, just doesn't wash. No. And I don't understand why intelligent people like Dermot Ferreter somehow or another dodge that. Why are they doing that? Surely that runs contrary to what all history is about, where you look at the past and try to learn from it and from other incidents that happened.
Jude, I would suggest, and I'm going to extreme here, that if you start going, you're labelled right away as a fellow traveller of the provisional IRA, and suddenly you're outside the consensus, outside the pale, and your chances of that, if you're in a history department or an education department or a politics, if you suddenly get labelled for that, I think your career prospects are suddenly narrowed somewhat. And you were talking earlier on about the guy and anybody dissents from the ruling sort of orthodoxy, suddenly outside the pale. Well, you look at your friend in the NEFIT, the professor in Cork or wherever he was, and he was dropped from the board. Jude, you can exclude very, very quickly in a small country like Ireland, and suddenly you're no longer in the inner circle and your opportunities. So everybody we have had sort of, what would you say, since 1968, we have had a lot of conditioning where there's one narrative and that's the one, those boys bad, other boys good, and that's been going on, but this has bathed in a golden light of the 1920s, and this sort of harsh light of the 1970s. It's so, like, remember the old Hollywood? I always go back now and get the cowboy, the good guy wore a white hat, and the bad guys always wore a black hat. It was there's a simplistic narrative, and it's not like that at all. It's a very, very complex narrative.
Yeah, well, you see, another thing I can understand to an extent people from the south avoiding, getting too tied up or sympathetic to the north or Republicans.
Yeah, that's the word I was trying to remember. Sympathetic.
And they didn't want to get involved. Okay, you sort of understand that. Everybody wants to, be preserved their life. Yeah. But all that is now, would you believe it's 30 years ago?
Yeah.
That's 30 years ago since that stopped. And still we are getting everybody, in fact, and people who should know better, like historians, like Dermot Ferreter, and he's not the worst of them by any means, and they simply refused to acknowledge the fact that this section of history was the way it was.
Yeah.
It's. Do you think they're doing it and not knowing they're doing it, or do you think they're doing
no,
it? Really
Jude, there's almost an agreement. Look, just don't bring the North into it. Dermot Ferrier was probably brought on to talk about Terence McSweeney, and he just stuck to Terence McSweeney, and he didn't draw any parallels with the North. And you know, and in fact, he'd probably told, "Hey, don't just stick to Terence McSweeney."
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't talk about it. It's bad for my blood pressure. Okay, let's move on to the last item, and that was, I don't know if you watched the game last night. Did you?
Jude, I can I interrupt you here now, because I'm on his says I've seen the one time. I remember the time Ireland were playing England about 20 years ago. I was sitting with my heart was going like I have reached the stage now I couldn't give a monkey's. I see international football. It's the most boring. I don't think I've watched a good game in years. Since Alex Ferguson, who I detested, retired, I've nearly lost interest in football. There used to be Kevin Keegan, what do you call it? Alex Ferguson, Jose Mourinho. I used to, what was going on off the field was far more interesting half the time what's going on. Now, if you ask me, you know, who's the manager of Wolves, couldn't tell you. And who's the manager of West Bromwich, I haven't a notion. You know, the whole thing seems to have gone. And see the way now they play international football, and sort of 9 guys behind the ball, and they played sideways like Bruce or Wilkinson used to play for Manchester United. You know, they called him the crab. The ball went sideways all the time. Like, I don't know about you, Jude, but I lost it. Like the Republic lost last night, and I was in Slovakia, you know, on penalties, and I was watching it but Jude, I was bored beyond belief. Now, Northern Ireland's through, so fair play them.
Yeah, I didn't watch the first half, but I went to the second half, and I quite enjoyed it actually. Although I thought the Republic team, I kept thinking back. I think maybe Jack Charlton spoiled us all.
Yeah.
You know, those days spoiled us because those were such wonderful, wonderful days. When the Irish team, ugly football, you can call it what you want, but by God, they got the national passions roused, and it was huge.
Yeah, by the way, I've seen Eamon Duffy started that. It was ugly. It wasn't ugly football. It was great. I remember my heart going like hell. It was great football when they played Italy and Yankee Stadium. Jesus, what a game! When they played England, and what a game! You know, and they always knew they could get a result. And they played Germany, and they got a result. They played Holland, got a result. This is when they were a team, and it was a good team. Now you sit and watch and going, like, who's he?
Well, here's a question for you. I mean, without doubt, if you ask me, would I support the Republic of Ireland team? I do. But would I not be open then to the charge from other people? What are you doing supporting a team that is living or work, you know, represents a different state from the one you're in? Why aren't you supporting Northern Ireland?
Excuse me, let me ask that question directly. Do you support Northern Ireland?
Not a chance. Not a chance. No.
Why not?
I'll tell you why. It's because I believe that Northern Ireland came into existence against the will of people like myself, nationalists, Republicans, the Catholic minority. It came into existence at the end of a gun, and remains essentially in existence that way for the moment, at least, although we're hopeful that there'll be a border poll. But the idea that you have a state forced on you, which discriminates and gerrymanders for years, and then beats people off the street, and then there's all sorts of things. And now we're saying, hey, go and support that team. I remember 30 years ago, Pat, going to a guy, I was doing a radio program at the time, and I went to a guy who was the PR man for the Irish Football Association. That's the Northern thing.
Yeah.
And I asked him, you know, what about this reputation that there's sectarianism within the Northern Ireland team? And he says, well, that's a past. We have so many initiatives going here. You know, and that was before that was about 10 years before Neil Lennon was given a death threat if he ever appeared for playing for Northern Ireland. And it's still, sectarianism is at the heart of support of the Northern Ireland team. I'm convinced of that. So anybody thinks I'm going to support, and thousands, tens of thousands like me, will never support Northern Ireland. You'll not get many people who would say that, but I don't mind saying it.
Yeah. So there was an honest answer to your question anyway. You left me with nothing to say.
Well, there's one other thing. you ever see that wonderful play by Mary Jones, A Night in November?
No, I haven't. In fact, I was in
Oh,
Derry some years back, and I was in my other life then. I was working, and I
uh,
couldn't go to see it.
oh, it's
But it's fabulous, apparently.
well worth seeing. Essentially, it's a one-man show, and it's
Yeah,
essentially the story of a guy who's supporting Northern Ireland, and he realizes suddenly the bigotry and hatred that is directed at anybody Catholic, anything to do with nationalism and so on. And he's disgusted. His own father, I think, is really seriously sectarian, and he finds himself swept up with the Republic of Ireland team, and he
yeah,
goes to New York with them, and
yeah.
he has a ball. They have
Uh,
such a good time, you know.
Jude, I'll leave you with this one. Remember the famous match between Northern Ireland and the Republic to get through to, I think it was the World Cup of Europe. I can't remember now. Remember it was in Windsor Park. I remember Alan McLaughlin scored about the 88th
Yes,
minute
yes, I
for the
remember that
Republic.
well. Oh, yes. That was based. That's what that program that one.
But aye, well, the whole Jack Tarleton apparently, several people have been found that whole experience unbelievable. That the sectarianism and the bigotry was on that the level of vitriol and hatred. Apparently, he was shocked at this, and that match. Billy Bingham's role that night was far from noble, and I think that was a turning point for many nationalists in the north. After that, no.
Yeah, well, I think that might have been too much enthusiasm for it in the first place, but certainly that brought it.
Yeah, that's exactly. I don't think it was
it.
exactly. It was a lot of people queuing to join, but I think after that, it was sort of like a Rubicon.
Yeah,
People,
yeah. So all we need now is a decent manager for the South and a decent team, and after that, we're flying.
Absolutely.
Sack every one of them. Okay,
Okay,
Pat.
Jude.
Thanks very much.
See you later.
Yeah.